Well, for more on the security angle, we're joined now by Phil Gursky, a former strategic analyst for CSIS. He's in Ottawa. And Phil, we're getting word from French media that the anti-terror unit is investigating this in Nice, and the authorities are saying that doesn't necessarily mean they've concluded it is a terrorist attack, but that is the unit that's taking the lead in investigating what happened here in Nice. And I take it that wouldn't surprise you very much.
Well, not at all. I think we have to be really careful in trying to figure out who's behind this. But I think the initial reports about what happened are certainly consistent with an act of terrorism. So it would make the most sense for French authorities to give the lead in the investigation, as you say, to anti-terrorist officials.
We just heard from a freelance reporter in Paris who was actually at an event not long ago, last night, Paris time, with the president, Francois Hollande. She talked about the high level of security that you would expect for her to get into the building where this was being held. By contrast, a crowd on a promenade in Nice on Bastille Day seems like such a soft target. A truck as a weapon is something which is accessible to so many people. What does this attack, the target and the weapon, what does it tell you about who might be behind it?
Well, what's really interesting is a few things. You can't lock down everything. Like you said, it's one thing to lock down the presidential palace. It's another to lock down several kilometers of a parade route, for example. Secondly, the modus operandi in this attack, which was someone using a truck, that's been called for years now in magazines like Dabiq magazine of Islamic State or Inspire of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So they've been calling on lone actors and inspired people to use this kind of tactic for the very reasons you cited. It's not hard to get a truck. It's easy to go and attack a crowd with little security. So if this turns out to be an Islamist extremist attack, which I'm kind of thinking it probably is, this may be in fact a fulfillment of this exhortation we've been seeing for years.
We're speaking with Phil Gursky live, a former strategic analyst with CSIS. Given your experience, your history, what role, if any, do you think Canada might be playing tonight?
Well, we do have operation centers that are 24/7 in this country. My guess is that they are engaged with what's happening. They may be, in fact, in contact with their French counterparts. I can't say that for certain, but they're certainly following events to determine what happened, what claims are being made. I haven't seen a claim that's been actually verified yet by a group like Islamic State. So they're looking for more answers as to who was behind this, what was the motivation, why did this happen?
I would think that for many of the people watching here, this kind of attack is so dismaying. Obviously the loss of life, but also the nature of it, and this feeling that we don't want to live in an armed camp, and yet at the same time it makes us vulnerable to this kind of thing. From your perspective as a security analyst, as a former analyst for CSIS, how do you react to what's happened here?
Well, I'm very saddened in many ways. I tweeted a few minutes ago that I worked in CT for most of my life. And it really saddens me to see this happen. Unfortunately, and I'm not trying to dismiss the loss of life, but this has become the new normal. I live in Ottawa, and I often go to Parliament Hill on Canada Day, and there's hundreds of thousands of people on the front lawn enjoying the fireworks. We can't expect our security and intelligence agencies to be everywhere at all times. As you say, we don't want to live in a police state. They do a really good job. They catch most people. They have great investigative skills. And yet to expect perfection is really unreasonable. So I think that we have to accept that this is what happens in the 21st century. It's sad to have to say that. I grew up in a time where terrorism was section C of the paper if it was ever there. Now it's on the front page every day. That's what's changed, I think, since I was a kid.
We heard a report earlier this evening that there were arms and grenades in the back of this truck. Obviously, it sounds ominous. What do you make of that?
So certainly there's been conflicting reporting on how many assailants there were. Some are saying one lone actor, some are saying there were several. So we have to wait and find out more information. It seems that just driving a truck, if there were weapons in the back, and that again has to be confirmed, it seems to suggest that driving the truck through the crowd was not the only part of the attack. So that might be the initial phase, kill and wound as many people as you can, and then if at some point the truck gets stopped or whatever, then you have sort of plan B, which is to pull out arms and start firing at people.
it's all a matter of perspective. One of our security analysts was saying that there should have been tougher, more, less permeable security in Nice tonight that would have been able to maybe stop this truck from getting close to the crowds. Room for debate. I'm sure there'll be lots of guessing and second guessing about what should have happened. One of the things I noticed, though, is that wherever this truck ended up, after it killed and injured so many dozens of people, the windshield was riddled with bullets. It speaks to, I suppose, depends on your perspective to use the word quick, but some kind of security response that happened fairly soon from the French authorities.
Two things. So, in response to the first part, as I said, you can't lock down everywhere. I've never been to Nice. I don't know what the boulevard was like where the attack took place. I can imagine it was a logistic nightmare to try and have like a security envelope that was total. Secondly, as you said, French security forces, once the attack was happening, once it was clear something was going on, they responded quite quickly and neutralized the gunmen. So again, the security forces do the best job they can. It's an impossible situation to guarantee success. I think we have to recognize this is really, really hard.
One last thing I want to ask you. I was thinking back to the terror attacks in Paris in November, and we heard the president at the time talk about locking down the borders. And I remember the sort of not just the symbolism of that, but as we tried to interpret that, it sounded like they were worried about groups of people, groups of mobile people who might be going back and forth, and I think in that case, perhaps between France and Belgium. What sort of things are you looking for over the next few hours to get a better sense of how the authorities are dealing with this in Nice? What sort of things might tell us if they have quickly determined it's, for example, a lone wolf attack, or if they feel that it's a group involved?
Right. So I'm looking for who the perpetrator is. Do they have any intelligence on where he was? Had he traveled, for example, recently? We have to remember that France is the top European country that sends foreign fighters to Iraq and Syria. Secondly, indigenously, France has a huge problem with Islamist radicalization and extremism. Their prisons are full of hundreds, if not thousands, of convicted terrorists. So this doesn't have to necessarily be a guy who went to Iraq and came back and was ordered back or commanded whatever. We need to find out who he was. Was he known to intelligence services? Did he have a travel pattern? Was he involved with other groups? I can tell you categorically he was not self-radicalized, because there's lots of people in France that share these types of ideologies. So there's a lot more information that has to be determined. If he was on the radar of French intelligence, I would also caution against calling this an intelligence failure. When you're looking at tens of thousands of people, you can't follow them all. And so just because one gets through doesn't mean your intelligence services are incompetent.
Phil Gursky, a former strategic analyst with CSIS, speaking with us live tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.